rules about your front door, but now they're controlling your electricity. That's exactly what happened to me. I never realized that as a homeowner in this community, I'd actually own the utility company that powers my home. I always thought my energy came from a local provider, but in this case, it's all tied up in the hands of the HOA. And when a storm hit, they decided to shut everything down. Why? Well, stick around because it gets even crazier. I had to dig into my rights, get to the bottom of why the HOA had so much power, and figure out if they could really just flick the switch like that. Was this legal? What does it mean for the future of living in this neighborhood? But the real shocker came when I uncovered something no one had warned me about, something that changed everything. Stay tuned, because this is a story that might just make you rethink where you live. So, here's the thing. I had no idea that I even owned the utility company. The HOA, or Homeowners Association, is usually just the group that enforces rules about lawn care, noise, and what color you can paint your house. But I learned that the HOA in my neighborhood actually controls the infrastructure, including the power lines and electricity. It was one of those details buried deep in the fine print when I moved in. You know, the stuff you barely skim through when signing all those documents at closing. I started to dig into the history of the HOA, trying to understand how this all worked. Turns out years ago, the neighborhood decided it would be more cost-effective to have a private utility service. The HOA took over the power lines and energy distribution, and all the residents technically pay them, not the local power company. It seemed like a good idea at the time, except I didn't realize that meant the HOA had ultimate control over when and how we got our power. When I called the HOA's emergency number, I was met with a voicemail. No help there. As the storm raged on, I kept thinking, could they really just cut the power like this whenever they felt like it? What were they trying to do, and how much power did they have over us, really? The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. There was something strange about the whole situation, something I wasn't seeing yet. The more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. Who exactly in the HOA made this decision? And why would they cut off the power during a storm when everyone needed it most? The more I tried to get answers, the more I felt like I was hitting a wall. Calls went unanswered, emails went ignored, and the only thing I could rely on was the flashing red lights of my neighbor's house across the street, still lit up and comfortable while I sat in the dark. I wasn't the only one in the neighborhood frustrated. One of my neighbors, Karen, seemed just as upset. She had lived here for years, and she was the first person I ran into when I went outside to assess the damage. Her house had power too, and she was fuming. They do this every time there's a storm, she told me, shaking her head. But this time, it feels different. They're playing games with us. Karen had heard rumors about the HOA's recent power grabs. Apparently, they'd been getting more and more involved in the finances of the neighborhood. Some of the residents were talking about large, mysterious budget increases. Others whispered about the HOA hiring a private contractor to upgrade the power lines. But no one really knew what was going on behind the scenes. No one seemed to have any clear answers. The storm was still raging, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA had been preparing for something bigger. What was their endgame? Why did they need to control the power like this? What were they hiding? There was something in the air that felt off, and I couldn't ignore it. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. But the deeper I dug, the more it felt like I was stepping into a web I wasn't ready to untangle. The next day, the storm had passed, but the power was still out. The sun was barely peeking through the clouds, and the quiet felt eerie, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something. I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, trying to figure out who I could talk to, who might know more. As I walked past a few houses, I saw a familiar face, Tom, the president of the HOA. He was standing by his front gate, looking unusually calm for someone who'd just been through a storm like everyone else. I couldn't help myself. I walked up to him. "Hey Tom, what's going on with the power?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Why would the HOA shut it off during a storm? We all need it, especially with all the damage out there. He turned to me slowly, his expression blank, almost as if he didn't understand why I was upset. "The power was never really off," he said, almost too calmly. "It's just been rerouted. You'll get it back soon. Don't worry." Rerouted. What was he talking about? I was about to ask more questions when Karen, who had been walking her dog nearby, approached us. She had a concerned look on her face. "I talked to a few others," Karen said, her voice low. "They're all saying the same thing. Tom, we think you're hiding something from us." Tom didn't flinch, but something in his eyes shifted. Just for a moment, I saw a crack in his calm facade, like he was holding back something. A chill ran down my spine. What was he about to say? Why did it feel like he was on the edge of admitting something he didn't want us to know? But before I could press him further, he turned and walked back into his house, leaving us standing there, more confused than ever. We didn't know it yet, but something much bigger was unfolding behind closed doors, something we weren't ready to face. But I had a gut feeling that we were about to find out, whether we were prepared or not. I wasn't the only one starting to realize that the HOA wasn't just playing games with our power, they were playing games with us. And the worst part, I wasn't sure how far they were willing to go to win. The days after Tom's strange behavior left me uneasy, but the power still wasn't back on, and no one from the HOA was giving any answers. I had started digging deeper, researching the HOA's legal powers, and what I discovered was even more unsettling. It turned out that, under certain circumstances, they had the authority to shut off utilities, not just for safety reasons, but for financial ones. That's when it hit me. What if this wasn't just about control? What if the HOA was in financial trouble, and this was their way of saving face, or even worse, profiting from it? My suspicions were confirmed the next day when I received an anonymous letter slipped under my front door. It was typed out, no return address, but the words on the page made my stomach churn. The letter warned that if the residents didn't pay up for upgraded services, we'd continue facing power cuts and even higher bills. But here's the kicker. The letter didn't come from the HOA's usual channels. It was signed by someone else entirely, someone who seemed to have insider knowledge of the HOA's finances. I showed it to Karen, and her reaction was just as shocked as mine. "This is bad," she muttered, her face pale. "I've heard rumors about mismanagement, but this is different. They've been keeping the money from residents and using it for something else." That's when everything clicked. I realized that the HOA was in way over its head, possibly in a financial crisis they hadn't let anyone know about. Were they really willing to put everyone's lives on hold just to cover their tracks? The more we uncovered, the more it seemed like there were dark secrets lurking, ones the HOA had been hiding for years. And the more I learned, the clearer it became. What was happening here wasn't just a bad decision. It was a strategy, and it was much bigger than anyone had imagined. But the worst part was realizing that, somehow, we were all caught in the middle of a game we didn't even know we were playing. The more I thought about it, the more desperate I became to stop the HOA from continuing this power grab. I couldn't just stand by and let them drain the community like this. Karen and I decided to take a more direct approach. We had to get inside the HOA's meetings, see their financial records, and figure out exactly what was going on. We weren't the only ones getting suspicious. Several other neighbors were quietly joining our cause, sharing what they'd seen and heard over the years, all adding up to one massive, potentially illegal scheme. One night, Karen and I decided to sneak into one of the HOA meetings. I can't even describe how tense it was walking into that room, knowing that we were about to learn something that could change everything. The atmosphere was thick with secrecy. Tom and a few of the other board members were there, as usual, but there was something off in the air, something almost suffocating about the way they were acting. As we sat in the back, Karen leaned over and whispered, "This feels wrong." Like they're hiding something right in front of us. She was right. The moment the meeting started, it became clear they were stalling, talking in circles, refusing to address the financial questions we had. Then, just as I was about to speak up, Tom dropped a bombshell, something I never saw coming. He revealed that the HOA had signed a contract with a private company to manage the utility service, and this company had been charging residents hidden fees for months. And here's where it got wild. The company was owned by none other than Tom's brother. He was standing right there in the room, smiling like he'd won some sort of victory. The power outages, the inflated bills, the emergency shutdowns, everything was part of a plan to force residents to pay for so-called upgrades that only benefited their private company. I was stunned, but then, just as I was processing this massive revelation, something even crazier happened. The lights in the room flickered. Then they went out completely. Everyone gasped, and a cold silence filled the space. We were in the dark, literally and figuratively. The very system Tom had been exploiting had just failed, and no one knew why. I couldn't help but wonder, was this all a part of the plan too? Had Tom just set it up to make us feel vulnerable, to push us into a corner where we have no choice but to accept his terms? As I groped around in the dark, a chill ran down my spine. It felt like the chaos was only just beginning, and the worst part, we were no longer in control of our own fate. As the room stayed dark and silent, my heart pounded. We had exposed the truth, but we still weren't out of the woods. Tom's brother seemed just as shocked as everyone else when the power went out, but it was clear to me that this was the moment of reckoning. Karen and I, along with a few of the more vocal neighbors, quickly started taking pictures of the contract and notes that were being passed around. This was it. We had the evidence. Once the lights came back on, the board tried to act like nothing had happened, but the damage was done. We took those photos straight to local authorities, demanding an investigation into the shady dealings. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. The HOA had been skimming off the top and using residents' money for private gain. With enough pressure, the HOA was forced to step down, and the power lines were taken over by the city's utility company. The whole situation left me with a bitter taste, but it was also a wake-up call. We had been blind to what was happening behind the scenes, trusting a system that was supposed to protect us. The whole ordeal made me realize just how important it is to stay vigilant and to never stop asking questions, even when it feels uncomfortable. In the end, we took back our neighborhood, but the cost of our complacency was something I would never forget.